in war news, there was a big story about a lot of the assassinations and stuff that have been happening of like major Russian military figures and propaganda people and just all sorts of people, honestly, in Russia and Crimea and stuff like that, were orchestrated and facilitated by the SBU, which is a big. I think it was the Washington Post first broke that. So that the SBU is Ukraine's intelligence service, kind of like the CIA. Um, so that's a big story. I mean, also there was the big. I mean, I think this made news for everyone, but there was the big drone strike um, of or drone slash missile strike of Sevastopol with all the Russian naval military leaders and stuff, and they almost got the chief of the armed forces, Valery Gerasimov, but or Gerasimov. I might not be pronouncing that right. So that's big news. Um, in other news, there hasn't been much news, which tells me that because also the rains have just started, so I think that things are definitely slowing down at the front. I mean, obviously, like if you were there, I'm sure it wouldn't feel slow. Um, but things are slowing down. They have to basically, once it gets wet enough, I obviously am not there, so I can't say whether it's getting wet enough or not. They'll have to wait until it gets cold enough that it freezes. And once it gets cold enough to freeze, they can start again. But the types of offensives and the types of things they do over the winter offensives are just much different, both for the Russians and Ukrainians, obviously. Um, I mean, the Russians did a winter offensive last year. I mean, it was mildly successful, I guess. They got kilometers, in around Bakhmut and some other places. But I mean, a lot of that's been taken back now. So I mean, yeah, we're starting to see a lot of stagnation, offensively speaking, on both sides as resources start to dwindle, but also the ability of both sides to defend their territory has increased. So it makes it harder and harder for they've dug in, the Russians have put countless mines, and the Ukrainians have also dug in quite well. So like you basically have two sides that are very ready in a way that they might not have been as ready last year. They were still figuring out trench warfare. They were still figuring out how they were going to fight in this kind of modern hybrid old school warfare. Um, and so, but now I feel like they have figured that out, and the result of that is kind of a stalemate. But it's not exactly a stalemate. It's just a much slower, more thought out conflict in certain ways. Like it takes a lot more energy to make a breakthrough than it did in the beginning of the war, um, which is kind of bad for both sides. But I mean, normally you would think that that benefits Ukraine because, like, obviously they're the smaller country in danger of being overtaken by the Russians. But Ukraine has a lot of like political capital riding on continued successes in the offensive, trying to keep Western countries interested. Um, and so that is a major factor at play. I don't know. I don't know how much that matters necessarily. I think they might be overestimating how much it matters that they're successful, because I think for Western countries, like it's just a matter of time. Like people get bored, even if it's the most interesting show in the world, like people get bored. And also now with the Israel-Palestinian conflict, people who do pay attention are turning their eyes to that conflict. Um, so less and less oxygen is in the room for the Ukrainian cause, I would say. That doesn't mean that like the Ukrainian cause is abandoned. It just means that over time there's going to be less and less strong support for Ukraine. And the Ukrainians know this, and that's why they feel such pressure to make something happen this year. Um, Obviously, it doesn't seem like they're going to make too much happen, but where the war has really been being won by them, in my opinion, is the drone war, as I've said in another video. I actually just saw that they just released a new Ukrainian-made drone, which is basically like a anti-tank RC car, um, and it looks super cheap and super effective, which is what you want for drones. Um, and that's gonna be what you're gonna see making moves as the front lines kind of stagnate. Like the drone warfare and the electronic warfare and the information warfare are gonna become the main areas of attack. Um, So that's interesting stuff. Um, and also once stuff gets cold enough here, obviously, like there's going to be probably a new renewed airstrike missile coordinated campaign against Ukrainian infrastructure, specifically the energy grid in Ukrainian cities. So I'm we're getting ready for that in Kyiv. People are talking about it. It's definitely something that you're always aware of. But so far, so good. I predict you probably won't start seeing that stuff until maybe late November, early December. Um, but you never know. And also, of course, once it starts, it will probably continue all the way through to January or February. Um, because that's what they try to maximize that damage at the time when the energy need is the highest in the coldest parts of the winter. Because also the Russians are running out of munitions and stuff just like the Ukrainians. It's a little different, but and obviously Russia has a bigger capacity to produce, but they also have major worker shortages and other things. I mean, the North Korean munitions make a difference, but that's it's kind of like a temporary high. Like that'll help them in the like maybe for the next year or maybe like just a few months, maybe 6 months, and then use is just going to outstrip production on both sides, and so that pretty much to me seems to mean that like you're gonna see a maybe not a freezing of the conflict, but a massive cooling down of the conflict. And both sides are going to be a lot more targeted and specific with their offensives and like where they choose to use their limited resources and munitions. Especially, you've already seen this with the Russians. I mean, I think I saw an article a while ago that they're using like a third less munitions than they were like 6 months ago or something like that, or maybe it's two thirds less. I forget the exact number, but it's because and also there's reports coming that they've uh, been doing training with their artillery people to be much more accurate, which is so interesting and so revealing about Russian war strategy that they didn't train their people to be accurate with artillery because that wasn't considered important, which is just mind blowing, honestly. Because that's just their kind of widespread use of artillery is just so indiscriminate. I mean, it's supposed to be kind of like a show of strength, I guess, but it's just so ill-conceived, quite frankly. But obviously, they realize that it's ill-conceived because they're changing that, and they're using like laser-guided systems and like drones and stuff to target and get more accurate artillery, which is bad for the Ukrainian side. But there's also less artillery being used, so I mean, in some ways, it might be a little better. Um, Obviously, both sides, I've seen articles and stuff that are running out of artillery shells and munitions, and they don't have enough for what they would want to have. Um, I mean, we don't know how that's going to turn out. I mean, no one can make any predictions. Some black swan event could happen, but if nothing changes, they're going to have to decrease their usage to be in line with production, which basically means a shrinking of the theater of conflict and more specific targeting of infrastructure and targets and things like that. But anyway, that's the war from the end of October 2023.